Number 2.
I'm not convinced that there is an afterlife or such thing as ghosts or demons, but I once saw something in the woods that felt so unnatural it made me second guess how I see the world. I was hiking up a hillside thick with trees in the middle of the night during a long weekend. Some friends and I decided that we would hike to the top of the hill and light off some fireworks. Approaching the hill and surrounding the base of this hill was a rolling grassy valley. It was around midnight, full moon plus light mist, straight out of a horror movie. The strange part was, I wasn't nervous or scared or anything. I was having a great night with my buddies. I didn't have any of my defenses up. My buddies and I just hiked in a straight line through the rolling grass valley approaching the hill when something caught my eye. On my right, I saw a tall, shadowy figure standing perfectly upright on the top of a small grassy hill. It was standing there, right next to a large dead tree. I couldn't make out any details. Both the tree and the tall figure were silhouetted under the moonlight. The strange part was, seeing this figure didn't scare me. I didn't immediately sense any threat. I almost assumed that it might have just been another hiker or somebody having a smoke. I passively turned my flashlight on it, and that's when it happened. In an instant, as my light hit the spot that the figure was standing, it instantly moved just outside of the range of my flashlight, like it teleported or something. But just as vividly as I saw it standing in its initial spot, as my light hit that spot and the figure moved, I could see it standing just outside of the range of my light. My breath paused. In an instant, a wave of dread washed over me. Something felt 100% unnatural about what had just happened. As a reflex, I moved my light to the new spot where the figure was, and as my light passed it, it disappeared. I've never passed out in my entire life. Not from heat, not from getting knocked out, never. But in that moment, I felt my knees give way from under me, and I just fell to the ground. My friends turned and looked at me, trying to pick myself up, and my knees were just too wobbly to stand. They helped me, and I tried explaining to them what I experienced. I'm willing to bet that it was all just light and shadows playing games with my eyes. But I'll never be able to explain that sensation I felt of feeling like I'd just seen something I shouldn't have seen. Something so unnatural that my body's instinctual reaction was to go limp.
Number 1.
I am a 33-year-old female from Los Angeles. 3 years ago, my boyfriend and I turned 30, sold everything we owned, took his Trailblazer, and decided to just travel around the States and Canada. I guess you could call us backpackers, as we tend to chase good weather, find a state park and backcountry hike into the wilderness for days at a time. My brother likes to joke that we're anti-establishment hippies. We don't necessarily live off-grid, but between the two of us, we have one prepaid phone. We use it for emergencies or checking in with family and friends, and one MacBook which I use for work. I'm a freelance writer, content creator, and I'm on a retainer with a robotics company. I mostly write boring white papers or web content. The whole point of our living situation is to live debt-free and have as few bills as possible. I only use free Wi-Fi, so 1 or 2 times a week we have to go to a city with a Starbucks. This background info is only important so you know more about who we are and how simply we live. Neither of us are involved in social media and know very little of Reddit or Instagram or use any apps. And because our phone isn't a smartphone, we don't even text. Last summer, we decided to do some backcountry hiking in Arkansas. It's one of those states that you don't really ever hear about other hikers visiting, but we read that it had some beautiful natural landscape, and it does. The rules at this particular park were pretty lax. We didn't need a permit, there were a few basic laws, but there was no check-in needed. We had all the basics and had planned to do a 6-day hike, 3 in, 3 out. The whole time we were out there, we didn't see or hear another soul. But on day 1, we were prepping to move off trail and find a camping spot, as it was getting near dusk. Half a mile off trail is usually the standard for us. We took what looked like a kind of animal trail, and about half a mile out, we saw a green 2-person tent. It was almost camouflaged in the foliage, so we came on it almost by accident. Some backpackers prefer privacy, others are more social. We're the more social type. We've had some great experiences camping near some other backpackers, sharing stories, food, and a joint or two. We were around 30 yards away from the tent. It was zipped closed, so my boyfriend shouted a greeting to make our presence known. No movement and no sound. We assumed Green Tent Guy either wasn't around or didn't want to be bothered, so we started off in a new direction to get some distance between us. We camped and never heard a peep. We moved along the next morning, completely forgetting about Green Tent Guy until nearing the end of day 5 on our trek back. We were again looking for a spot to camp off of the trail when we came up on the green tent again. This isn't that unusual, but normally backcountry hikers keep moving, so we really weren't expecting it. The tent flap was open, so my boyfriend yells his greeting again, and nothing. My boyfriend wants to go check it out, saying that it's weird and maybe someone is hurt. I didn't like the idea from the get-go, because even though we hadn't had any bad experiences personally, we'd heard enough stories from other backpackers about hermits and mountain men that want privacy, carry guns, etc. But my boyfriend assured me that we'd be fine, and if all else fails, offer him some weed to keep the peace and we'd go on our way. As soon as we get within 20 yards of the place, the smell of decomposition is intense. My boyfriend has been hailing his greeting over the last 20 yards, and once the smell hits him, he stops and turns to me and says, What if we find a dead body?" My skin crawled. I was immediately afraid. I've never seen a dead body before, and I don't want to. The closer we got to the tent, the worse the smell got. I knew for sure that we were going to walk in and see some old camper's rotting corpse. But what we found was worse than that. Outside the tent was a dead doe's legs, all 4 of them covered in flies. It looked like the legs had been cut off most of the way and then ripped off the rest of the way. It was a mess. Inside was the body and head of the deer, but the middle portion was swaddled in a blue fleece blanket that was blood-soaked at the bottom where the legs used to be. It was laying on its side, bottom facing the tent entry. The tail had been cut off, and the anus and everything else was covered in dry blood and agape, like something had been penetrating it. The same with its mouth. The bottom portion was bent way down at a scary broken-looking angle. The tent was open, so we could see everything without having to go inside. Not that we would have, anyway, because at this point, the smell was almost debilitating. There was a dirty, almost empty clear bottle of Jergens baby oil and a stained green and white fringed kitchen towel. That was it. I immediately started crying and begged him to go. All he could muster was, "What the fuck?" And we turned and ran. We ran to the trail and jogged down it for as far as we could until dusk was fully upon us and we had to set up camp. We didn't go very far off the trail and neither of us slept. We didn't start a fire or use headlamps after full dark. We just sat up whispering to each other, going over and over what we had just seen. Every little noise startled us. I kept thinking any moment that a dead deer rapist would come back to his tent, see our footprints or something, know we were there, and track us back to our tent. I've never been so scared in my entire life. Just before dawn, we tore down and started out. My boyfriend stopped at the ranger station on our way out of the park to report what we had seen. The ranger was a young guy, around our age, and he looked as freaked out by our story as we were telling it. He wrote most of it down, and my boyfriend showed him on a map approximately where it had been. He asked if we knew how the deer was killed, and at that point, we hadn't even thought about it. We just assumed that it had been shot, but because of the blanket, we didn't see a wound. But we weren't exactly giving it an autopsy either. We have since shortened our backcountry hikes to a maximum of 4 days. We've also been a lot less eager to call out to other campsites, and have never approached another unmanned tent again.